This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. This is a show talking about topics of the day from a secular and humanist value perspective. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
In this episode, we talk about the He Gets Us Super Bowl ad and the shadowy Christian nationalists behind it. And then we replay an interview I did with Rachel Lazar of Americans United back in 2023.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community with reason and compassion for a better tomorrow. Views expressed on the Glass City Humanist are not necessarily those of Sholey or WAKT Radio.
Welcome to another episode of Glass City Humanist on WAKT. I'm your host, Doug Berger. Hope everybody is having a good day. And hope everybody celebrated Darwin Day on February the 12th. That is the day that the botanist Charles Darwin was born. He wrote the book about evolution back in the 1850s that ever since then all the religious people have been trying to ban. And so humanists like to celebrate his birthday. And one of the things that our group, Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, did is we volunteered at the Seagate Food Bank. And what we did was we helped put together some packages, some night clothes packaging for kids and some adults as part of their Project PJ. And it's one of the side projects that they do. You know, they just don't do food. They also do other charitable work. And so we helped put some of those packages together, spent a couple hours doing that to celebrate to celebrate Darwin's birthday. And we really had a good time. They are still collecting donations for Project PJ until February the 28th. So if you're able to donate, go to their page, seagatefoodbank.org, and look for the Project PJ location, and I'll tell you how to donate for that. It's really a good program. We really enjoyed ourselves. We had about 8 or 9 people that hung out with us and got to do that. It wasn't that hard. It was a little bit chilly in the warehouse because it's not heated. But it was more like a refrigerator. But it was still a good time for all of us. And we're going to try to have volunteering at a food bank, maybe not always Seagate. And we're going to try to do that once a quarter. And so if you're interested, check out our website at humanistwle.org if you want to get more involved with the group.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio.
Before we get into the heart of today's episode, I did want to share an update to a story that we talked about the last episode about Pastor Chris Havell at Dad's Place Church in Bryan, Ohio. He had been criminally charged with zoning violations for having an illegal homeless shelter in his church. And the First Liberty Institute, a Christian nationalist right-wing legal firm, was going to represent him in a federal court because they sued, saying that by them charging him with zoning violations, they were trying to stop his religious beliefs, which isn't true. As I said in the original interview that I did with our friend Bruce Garanser, I don't believe that Pastor Havell is being persecuted because he's Christian or that he's religious. He was drawing attention and being charged because he was having a unapproved homeless shelter in his church. And what they were doing is, it was basically kind of a flop house, because most shelters are temporary and they're trying to move you to permanent housing or get you some kind of services. Pastor Havell wasn't doing that. So that's another reason why the city of Bryan wasn't too happy with him. So they went ahead and they just this past week, they dropped the charges, the criminal charges against Pastor Avell. The city did. They did note in the court record that they were dismissing them with prejudice, and that's a legal term meaning that they could refile them at any point. So my guess is that they probably came to some kind of mutual agreement where they would drop the charges and Pastor Avell would try to rectify some of the issues that brought the charges in the first place. He, in the news article for, I think it was the Bryan newspaper, he still said that he was going to house homeless people. So, I'm thinking probably he got some donations, or maybe some people in the community are going to work with him to get that space in compliance and zoning compliance. I still think, like I said, he still needs to work to move the people that he helps, try to move them to permanent housing. Bryan and Williams County and a lot of rural areas have a tremendous homeless problem, and they lack many cases lack affordable housing because those particular areas, they're just ignored. Most people think that the homeless problem or housing problem is just in the big cities, but it's also out in the farm country, in the agricultural areas, and smaller towns like Bryan. And so I really think that the government and social service agencies need to come together and try to resolve it. And it sounds like that's what's going to happen, that Pastor Avell is going to work with some of the social service agencies, as he should have done in the first place. Because, and I get the city is probably, they got pretty bruised publicly about it, especially when the right-wingers got a hold of it and was drumming up support for whatever they're doing. And I'm sure that they got wrung over the coals. I know some people even claim that the people in Bryan were devil worshippers or whatever because they were trying to go against the church. And again, they weren't trying to close the church. They weren't trying to keep Pastor Avell from preaching. What they were trying to do was to get him to comply with zoning regulations with regards to having a homeless shelter in his church. Because again, from the original story, he just opened it up and took people in. He didn't have a plan. And he claimed, and that's why the First Liberty got involved, is he claimed that God told him to do it and it was part of his religion. And I don't believe that religious people are above the law. And whether or not it's for religious reasons or not, they still have to abide by the laws that apply to all the rest of us. Now, if it was a law saying that he couldn't have a church, well, then that would be different. I would probably be on his side. But that's not the case. They weren't trying to keep him from preaching. And a lot of these religious freedom people, that's what they attempt to say, is anything that they have to do, that they're required to do, whether it be vaccinations, wear a mask, or shut down and limit the number of people, or close their sectarian schools. They always say, well, that's keeping them from practicing their religion, which is not the case. Just logically, you can practice your religion anywhere, in any location, in your car. You could do it in your home. You don't need a specific building to do that in. And so I'm not sure how this is going to go. The federal case is still active as far as I know right now. I haven't checked on it recently, but I'm guessing that's probably what they're going to do, is they're probably still going to take it to court. But since he's not being criminally charged anymore, it might be moot. So it might get thrown out of court just for the fact that the preacher is no longer injured. However, the way that some of these federal courts have been working the last couple of years, being injured by a state action doesn't seem to matter anymore. And so it could be that this will be a test case that they'll take to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they'll privilege religion even more who knows? Who knows how it's going to happen? All I know is currently right now, the federal case is still active. And so, but the civil case, the criminal charges for the zoning violations, those have gone away at this time. And so however this comes up, I'll try to keep people informed and let them know what's going on.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
Well, we had the Super Bowl this past weekend. It's the final game of the National Football League season. And you had the two top teams playing for the championship. You had the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm sure that there's probably a majority of people who don't care. But one of the interesting things about the Super Bowl and the telecast, that they have like a 6-hour pregame show. Anyway, that I don't watch. But during these pre-games and during the game and during the award presentation and everything, they show commercials. And it's always a big deal every year because some of these groups and companies pay millions of dollars for what is essentially a 30-second commercial to sell their wares. Some companies, I think the padlock company, Master Lock, used to do a yearly commercial. It'd be the only commercial that they did all year would be the Super Bowl. And then you had the famous Apple Macintosh ad in 1984 that harped on the 1984 aesthetic. And it goes on. And there was one year it was a bunch of crypto stuff, and that's not there this year. And there's Day Trader, the E-Trade with the baby that talks, and all these kinds of different commercials. And for some people who may not be interested in the football game, in the sports, they'll watch the commercials or pay attention to the commercials, and then like the halftime show too. That's another popular part. Anyway, so this year there was again a series of commercials from the He Gets Us campaign. The He Gets Us campaign is a religious campaign that talks about, they do some modern things, and then they say, Jesus did this too. And so basically what they're trying to do is they're doing ads for religion. And so this year they had some AI generated images of different people washing the feet of other people. Washing the feet is a religious thing. I'm not real sure the foot washing part. I know Islam, they have a big thing about foot washing, and there's some sects that don't do it, and but this particular commercial series, they did it. They did a 60-second commercial in the first half and a 30-second commercial in the second half. And it was interesting that one of the scenes was a police officer washing the foot of, I'm assuming, a criminal. And then you also had an anti-abortion protester washing the foot of an abortion provider, I think. According to the right-wingers who complained about that part of the spot, that's what it was. I don't know. But what's interesting about it is if you look at who pays for these ads, who produces the ads, it's a shadowy company. They're not transparent at all, because that's how Christian nationalists work. Is that they do their work in the shadows, and they also make it seem like it's innocuous. That what they're proposing is innocuous. It's not harmful. Come along, come on in. It's kind of like a Willy Wonka type thing. Hey, come on in, and then you find out how subversive it is, but it's not. So there was a couple articles that came out about who pays for these ads and who's involved. And there's this article in boingboing.net that pretty much encapsulated or brought together all the information together, because there was several different outlets that wrote about this. For example, it says the Super Bowl Jesus ad wasn't cheap. Sporting News explains that a 30-second ad cost $7 million, not counting the cost of creating the ad. The He Gets Us campaign ran 2 ads, a 60-second ad during the first quarter and a 15-second ad in the second half. And the main theme was showing the foot washing and everything was love your neighbor. It was a love your neighbor message. And it says, despite the love your neighbor message of the ads, the people and organizations funding the ads, according to Americans United for Separation of Church and State, have a record of fostering hateful Christian nationalism. The Super Bowl Jesus ad was part of a larger campaign that up until this year had been funded by the Servant Foundation, also known as the Signatory, which spent $20 million on the Super Bowl ad in 2023. According to research conducted by Americans United for Separation of Church and State, as of last year, the Servant Foundation had planned to spend $1 billion over the course of 3 years on the He Gets Us public relations campaign. And as Americans United explained, it says they hired a PR firm to address, in the firm's words, the problem of how did the world's greatest love story in Jesus become known as a hate group? Of course, they're the cause of their own problem. Not only has the Servant Foundation funded hate groups, but the PR firm Haven has represented these organizations. Key Shadow Network members Focus on the Family and Alliance Defending Freedom are in their portfolio. ADF is a noted anti-LGBTQ hate group that has argued repeatedly in courts that religion, and specifically Christianity, is a license to discriminate. They have one such case pending before the Supreme Court right now. And then Rolling Stone explains that the Servant Foundation has been a major funder of the Alliance Defending Freedom. And this spring, the ADF lawyers will be at the Supreme Court pushing to limit access to the abortion pill and to allow states to bar hospitals from performing emergency abortion care. So what Rolling Stone reported was that He Gets Us campaign is no longer part of the Servant Foundation, but is now being run by a nonprofit called Come Near. And it's being financially supported by the billionaire family behind Hobby Lobby, the arts and crafts chain infamous for its crusades to deny its employees birth control coverage and use of bathrooms associated with their gender identity. Hobby Lobby co-founder David Green has provided funding for the campaign, and his eldest son Matt is on the board of Come Near. The Green family, worth an estimated $15.2 billion, has long committed to operating its craft store empire on biblical principles. The family and Hobby Lobby previously led a successful fight in the Supreme Court opposing the Affordable Care Act's contraception mandate, citing their sincere religious objections to facilitating the provision of abortion items. The case led to a 2014 ruling finding that closely held corporations do not have to comply with the mandate if their owners express religious objections. Hobby Lobby separately led an unsuccessful 11-year legal fight to block a transgender employee from using the women's restroom at its craft store in Illinois. They've also, the Green family is also behind the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., and they also got in trouble for smuggling biblical items out of the Middle East for their museum. So there you go. But that's the ironic thing, is that the Green family doesn't want to have their employees have abortion care or birth control, and they're trying to block transgender employees from using the restrooms of their gender identity. Yet they're funding this campaign about Jesus loves everybody. And it's just ironic that that's happening. So that was the big thing that He Gets Us. It's pretty creepy. The AI pictures are pretty creepy. And I know there's quite a few conservative Christians that were against those ads. They did not like those ads at all because they claimed that it wasn't truthful to Jesus, which it's the ad and the foot washing and all that stuff and Jesus loves everybody. That is part of the Christian religion. It's just the fact that is that Christianity's adherents currently don't follow the teachings in most cases. They want to hurt people. They're behind the attacks on trans kids. They're supporting the anti-LGBT bills in all the states. A couple hundred bills in the last couple years. They had Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House. He moved the National Prayer Breakfast from a neutral venue into the Capitol building, which it should not be in the Capitol building. If political leaders want to go to a prayer breakfast, they shouldn't do it as part of their official capacity. It should be off the campus, as it were. But that's what we're dealing with currently. Is we get these ads like this that he gets us that doesn't conform to anything current. It's like aspirational. It's what they've been led to believe, but they don't practice that at all, and it's very hypocritical. So just remember that the next time you see the ad, because they also play it during the regular TV schedules. And you'll get caught up in it. You'll say, "Oh, that's a lovely, lovely ad," and then right at the end, it's like, "He gets us," and you're like, "Oh, I got sucked in again." They're very well done ads, well, except for the CGI stuff, the AI stuff from the Super Bowl. But in general, the ads are very well done. It's just, they're hypocritical. Aspirational hypocrites, is that a word? I don't know. But, they have one version of Christianity, but anyway. So I've gone on too much about this. I've given them way too much time. But I just want to make people aware of the money and the people behind these ads, that it's not a good thing. It's Christian nationalism run amok.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
For this episode of Glass City Humanist on WAKT, I wanted to replay an interview I previously did for Glass City Humanist back in April of 2023, last year, with Rachel Laser, or Laser, I think. I know I was going to mispronounce it. She is the CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. And I interviewed her back in April. The group, Americans United, had gotten with some faith leaders in the state of Missouri, some Unitarians and some other Protestant faith leaders, and filed a lawsuit about their abortion ban in Missouri, claiming that it violated the First Amendment, because the intent of many of the lawmakers during debate of the bill they were quoting scripture and saying that Lord is God and all this stuff. And so the intent of this law was to impose their religious beliefs on other people. So Americans United and some faith leaders in Missouri filed a lawsuit. The lawsuit is still ongoing. Their most recent hearing was back in November of 2023, where the state was trying to get out of it, was trying to get the lawsuit thrown out. And so we don't know. They had just had a hearing about it, so they're still waiting for a judge to decide. I think that they have a good case, because the intent of the lawmaker is always used in consideration of whether or not something violated the First Amendment. And if the intent of the lawmakers that passed this bill was to impose their religious beliefs on people, then that should be not part of our law. Rachel also talks about an upcoming event that they have called the Summit for Religious Freedom. And again, that is coming up again this year. It is going to be April 13th and 16th, 2024 in Washington, D.C. And they also have a virtual component that you can, if you can't make it to D.C. And it's at the address thesrf.org, thesrf.org. And if you want to attend, you can check that out, check that information out. But the rest of the interview is pretty much on point about separation of church and state. And I'm always of the belief that you need to defend the separation of church and state all the time. Because there's going to be somebody, some religious zealot, some Christian nationalist that's going to come and try to muck it up. And one of the topics that we talked about in the interview was school vouchers. And that has really been a real cluster F here in Ohio. One of the things is that it's being used to pay for tuition at a public charter school called the Northwest Ohio Classical Academy. And I did a podcast about Professor Lee Strang. He's the founder of that school. They just completed it. They spent, it was quite a few $1 million. It worked out to be $17,000 per student that they spent on this expansion. And it's a religious school where they try to hide the fact that they're religious. And if you want to go back into the archives and look for the Lee Strang profile I did, and you'll get all the gist on that. And so, the people that are benefiting from these vouchers are not poor kids in urban areas, as that was the intent. A lot of the people that are getting these vouchers, because there's really no rules on them anymore, are kids from families, affluent families, that can afford to send their kids to private school. And now they're getting the state to pay for it. So we talk about school vouchers in this one too. So this was a previous episode. We did this back in April of 2023. And enjoy.
This is Glass City Humanist on WAKT Radio. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show.
Okay, our guest today is Rachel Lazar. She is the president and CEO at Americans United for Separation of Church and State. She is a lawyer and an advocate and strategist who has dedicated her career to making our country more inclusive. She's also a religious minority, having been raised as a Reformed Jew, and so she understands personally how much it matters that our laws treat everyone fairly and equally. Thank you for being with us today.
Great to be with you, Doug, and with everyone.
Now, for somebody that has not heard of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, what do you do and what's your mission?
So Americans United for Separation of Church and State is nonpartisan, and we're not for profit. And we're basically an advocacy organization that brings together religious and non-religious Americans every day to fight in the courts, in Congress, in state legislatures, and in the public square for everyone's right to live as themselves, free from other people's religious dictates, and to believe as they choose.
And how important is separation of church and state to defending our religious freedom?
It is the guarantee of religious freedom. And that's why our founders were people of faith 75 years ago, who gathered together from different ideological and theological backgrounds. There were Seventh-day Adventists, there were Methodist pastors, There was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. There were seminary deans. And all these folks came together because they were people who were religious, and they understood how important it was to be able to be free, to have your own religious identity. And of course, that includes the right to be non-religious.
And is that important that you include all the different religious groups and the non-religious? Does that make your work easier?
Absolutely. I mean, we are what our name says we are. We are Americans United. We represent everyone because this issue is at the core of everyone's freedom and safety. And ultimately, without the separation of church and state, we would no longer have the American democracy. So for all patriots out there who value the American promise, they are church-state separationists, even if they don't realize it yet.
The Americans United recently joined a coalition of faith leaders in Missouri to file a lawsuit against the state's ban on abortion. What are some facts about that case in particular that makes it a religious freedom case?
That's a beautiful case, Doug, because that case showcases that in order to have freedom of religion in this country, we need to have reproductive freedom. And that's because different beliefs advise us to take different actions when it comes to our reproductive lives. And abortion bans impose one narrow religious viewpoint on everyone, taking away our ability to make our own decisions about our own bodies based on our own beliefs. So this case, which Americans United teamed up with the National Women's Law Center on and brought on behalf of 14 clergy from 7 different religious backgrounds, really showcases how different religious groups believe that it's a fundamental part of their religion, protecting their religion, and also America's promise of religious freedom to let people make that decision for themselves. And I can tell you a little more about it, Doug. I mean, it's an incredible case because all the sort of stars aligned with this case and made it the perfect place to bring a case. In Missouri, in the state constitution, they have tremendously strong church-state separation protections. And so number one, those protections have been found by the Missouri State Supreme Court to be even stronger than our federal promise of church-state separation. Number two, the lawmakers in the state are such emboldened religious extremists, the one who passed this ban, that they said all the quiet parts out loud about the religious motivations for the bill. They used to hide it for a while. They got smart, right? Sort of back in the days where, JFK ran for president and he had to give his church-state separation bona fides and it was trendy-er, right? That wouldn't have happened. But today, given sort of the Trump era and the religious extremism that led to it and that's ensued, these lawmakers not only boasted about the religious underpinnings of the bill that was based on their private religious beliefs, but they inserted religious language into the bill. They said in the bill, for example, that the Lord Almighty is the author of life. And so, it was very easy to point to the violation of church-state separation there. And personally, I will never forget creating a little circle with all of these clergy on the day that we launched the suit in Christ Church Cathedral, which is the church of the Episcopal bishop, who's one of our plaintiffs in the case, and just thinking together how America is really at its best when we're all joining together across our differences in order to support equality and each other's rights. So it was a beautiful day. I wish we could have had a humanist. We did have a Unitarian Universalist, but we didn't have any humanists or sort of officiants of non-theistic denominations, not because we didn't try, because we couldn't find one. The head of the humanists, the officiant for the humanists had moved to England, and we just were unable to find one, which I guess is its own statement about the state of certain parts of our country. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And I do know the officiant was James Croft, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, and he was head of the Ethical Society in St.
Yes.
Louis, and he just recently moved back to England.
Yes.
So
How dare he?
I don't know. Maybe he knows. Anyway.
Yes.
Recently, a group of Christian nationalist state attorney generals have gone to court to force the Biden administration to withdraw a 20-year-old approval of a drug that happens to be able to be used in abortions. Now, my question is, I thought the goal of the anti-abortionists was to make it a state issue. So why are they trying to ban this medication?
Because they have one goal, and that is to give supremacy across the land to conservative white Christians. That's the goal. And to impose that view, to codify it in the law, and to impose that on all of us, restricting our freedom and attacking the equality that our democracy is based in. So for them, ultimately, quote, state rights is secondary to the real goal, which is to give power and favor to themselves.
And I think we saw that when the Republican-led Congress was talking about doing a national abortion ban.
Right.
After we just got done getting rid of Roe v. Wade, now they want to do a national ban.
Right, because abortion bans impose one narrow religious viewpoint on everyone. And that's not allowed in America. In America, we have religious freedom, which means we get to make our own fundamental decisions based on our own belief systems. Also, abortion bans are horrific for women's health, equality, and safety, and for the safety of our families. So, I mean, there are so many problems. If you say you love America, if you say you love freedom of any sort, then you should be supporting the freedom to make reproductive decisions. And you can, by the way, choose not to have an abortion if that's what your beliefs dictate.
And how does Americans United decide what legal cases to take on? What kind of things do you think about or look for?
So one exciting part of what we do that a lot of people don't know about, and so I thought I'd mention it today, is we take reports of violations. So there's a place on our website right in the sort of upper right-hand corner where you can click and you can report a violation. And we resolve many of those, hundreds of those every year without needing to go to court. Because oftentimes, maybe it's a government entity or maybe it's a public school that just doesn't understand that something that they're doing is illegal. And we correct the record and they make that change. But when we choose our court cases, we have to choose them strategically and carefully. That's in part because there has been a crusade to take over our Supreme Court by these religious extremists. And unfortunately, we are living in a world where the ultra-conservative majority is undercutting church-state separation and many of the promises of our Constitution. Just last term, we saw this Supreme Court force the city of Boston to fly a Christian flag on their city hall flagpole against their will, force Maine taxpayers to fund religious education and discrimination with their own tax dollars against their will, force a public school in Bremerton, Washington State to allow a football coach to pressure his students to pray with him at the 50-yard line after football games, again, at a public high school where it was documented and on the record that students felt pressured to pray to play. And finally, reversed Roe v. Wade, 49 years of precedent that guaranteed freedom of religion and reproductive freedom. Because that is the state of play, Doug, right now in the country, we have to choose our cases awfully carefully. Number one, the other side is so emboldened right now to be bringing as many cases as they can to further expand the right to discriminate in the name of religion, the right to codify one religious viewpoint into the law, that sometimes we're put in a position where we're just the best folks around to play defense, because someone's got to, even if you're going for, reducing the losses, right? Someone's got to be playing that role, and it matters. Sometimes dissents, which we help to inform in big legal decisions, end up becoming the majority viewpoint, in future years. And then there's other ways, like with our Missouri lawsuit, that we can use state courts and state constitutions to advance the ball and use church-state separation as the shield to protect people that it's supposed to be. So we're also often busy sort of playing that role. And finally, there are areas where we can still make progress and where we have certainly not given up. I'm thinking of, the Catholic woman who was discriminated against in South Carolina, who wanted to work with foster kids who couldn't because she's Catholic and not evangelical Protestant, or the Jewish couple in Tennessee, the Rootin' Rams, that wanted to foster to adopt a beautiful little boy in Florida, went to their local foster care agency that they fund with their tax dollars, turned away because they're Jewish. And so those cases, we still feel like there's some hope in order to enforce state religious freedom protections, and we're moving forward with those.
Yeah, you mentioned that case where you're helping the woman that was Catholic. Probably not too many people know that Americans United is 75 years old, and it was originally founded as Protestants United for Separation of Church and State.
True.
And William Donahue from the Catholic League gives you guys a hard time all the time about that. And it's true. I mean, there was a lot of effort. I mean, you mentioned Kennedy, President Kennedy. He had to give a whole speech to tell people the Pope was not going to tell him what to do.
That's true.
So I just find it ironic that the shoe is on the other foot now, that they're no longer the minority religion and being discriminated against. There are several Supreme Court justices who are Catholic, and they seem to be anti-abortionists. They join in on the anti-abortion things. But then there's this Catholic woman in South Carolina that's getting discriminated against because she's Catholic.
Exactly. Let them take that case. And even better, Doug, I don't know if you remember the name of that case, but it's kind of an amazing serendipitous thing that the woman that we're defending in the South Carolina case is Catholic. Her name is Amy Madonna. The lawsuit is called so the lawsuit is called Madonna versus HHS, which is a mess. So let these justices take that case on and have to rule against Madonna, right?
Right.
In the name of religious freedom. I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah, and unlike the Catholic League, at least Americans United has evolved.
Right.
Since that time.
Right.
And takes on all cases of any kind of religious discrimination.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think what's evolved the wrong way is the Supreme Court. There's a recent study that showed that in recent times under the Roberts Court, this Supreme Court has ruled in support of religion over 80% of the time, and almost always in support of the mainstream majority religion, Christianity. Whereas formerly, the court ruled much less of the time in support of religion, and almost always in support of those who are more vulnerable, religious minorities.
Yeah, and I also find it ironic that a lot of the federal courts now accept religious people who are uncomfortable about something, and they have rejected secular people who feel uncomfortable about something. For example, if they walk into a courthouse and see a Ten Commandments monument, the courts have said, well,
that doesn't affect you. It doesn't force you to pray or anything like that. But if a religious person says, well, if I bake a cake, I'm supporting a gay wedding. And then they're like, oh, sure.
Yeah. I mean, we have this can't touch that attitude towards religion in this country, and it's leading us astray. I mean, look, I have a religion. I'm proud of my religion as a Jew. I've raised my kids in the religion. I have a wonderful husband who helps me teach them that religion. We're both very proud to be Jews, etc. Right? But there is a huge difference between having respect for religion and understanding the role it plays and allowing people to weaponize religion and to wield their religion as an excuse, a justification to harm other people. Like, how does that work where America is intentionally diverse and willfully promoting that diversity? It's part of the mosaic of who we are and what we created in the first place. It doesn't work. And that's why the logical endpoint of these white Christian nationalists or of religious extremists has to be to topple our democracy. That's why you saw them all out there parading and actually co-opting the Christian flag at the insurrection, because ultimately, if they're trying to codify their power and privilege in American law, that can't coexist with our democracy. They have to take it down. And that's really dangerous for all of us. That's why this country needs a national recommitment to church-state separation right now, because it's not too late, but before it's too late, we all have to re-educate and recommit to the separation of religion and government.
For more information about the topics in this episode, including links used, please visit the episode page at glasscityhumanist.show.
And just to point out that your background there is for the Summit for Religious Freedom.
Yes.
And that's coming up April 22nd to the 24th. And can you tell us a little bit about that and what a participant can expect from it?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. First of all, if you want to know more about it, go to thesurf.org, the SRF, Summit for Religious Freedom, right? SRF.org. So it's going to be super exciting. It's a conference that will be the hub of the religious freedom movement, because we all need each other in order to preserve religious freedom. If you think about the wall of separation between church and state and what rests on that wall, it's all these freedoms and aspects of our society that we treasure. It's the freedom to make reproductive choices. It's LGBTQ equality. It's thriving public schools. It's science informing our public policy. It's having books on the shelves of public libraries. It's the rights of religious and racial minorities, because of course, there's been lots of racism in the name of, justified, quote, justified by religion, across our past. So all these things topple when the wall of separation topples. And that's why this is a project of AU in partnership with so many allies who are taking part in the conference, putting on sessions, everyone from the Baptist Joint Committee to the National Women's Law Center, folks speaking about compassion and dying as a church-state issue, about queer rights as a church-state issue, about public school safety, of our public schools in this country as a church-state issue. We'll have keynote addresses as well. One of them will just be on with Brad Onishi, who also runs a podcast, which will be on white Christian nationalism and how we fight back. Another panel will be on abortion rights and how that's a church-state separation issue and how we fight back. And that one will feature Catherine Stewart, who's a renowned author and a journalist in this space, and our plaintiff in the Missouri abortion lawsuit, Reverend Tracy Blackman. So there are going to be so many exciting things. On Monday, we'll take it to Capitol Hill and lobby in support of the Do No Harm Act that says you cannot misuse America's treasured religious freedom law to license discrimination and harm to others. So we'll be taking that to the halls of Congress. So we're very excited about it and invite everyone to join us because it's very accessible online. And if you feel that you need a scholarship, even in order to be able to afford that online fee, there's a few spots left in person. And we want the whole thing to be so radically inclusive that for either online or in person, if you need it, apply for a scholarship and we'll get it to you so you can take part.
This is Glass City Humanist.
I wanted to go back briefly or talk about one of the bedrocks of church and state separation has been what's called the Johnson Amendment. And that's the IRS tax code that prohibits charities from getting involved in campaigns. Does it make your work harder that particular rule hasn't been enforced in so many years and it doesn't look like it's going to get enforced anytime soon?
It's very frustrating. It really is very frustrating. I mean, partisan politicking is bad for religion and bad for politics, and churches aren't singled out. I mean, all 501c3s have to abide. We're a 501c3.
Yeah.
We have to abide by the same rules. So it's definitely a shame in our society, and it allows for some of the shenanigans to happen that happened during the Trump years, some of these church rallies in support of candidates, and the reality is Americans don't want that. The super majority of Americans understand that interferes with comedy and unity in our houses of worship, and that eventually it can taint our houses of worship too, because when you have ties with the government in that way and with candidates, it comes with strings attached. It should, but we don't want that for religion. And also, everything is not disclosed when it comes to religion. So there's a lot of problems with the fact that it's not been enforced. And frankly, we think, especially with the increased funding to the IRS, that there's really no excuse not to be better enforcing the Johnson Amendment.
And do you think that the reason why that they kind of are dragging their feet on it is that they don't want to raise the hackles of the Christian nationalists? Because they tend to get targeted that way. I know when they were they were claiming that conservative groups weren't getting tax exemptions
Right.
Several years ago. So do you think that might play a part in it?
I don't see it quite that cynically. Here's how I see it. It's part of that can't touch this attitude towards religion in this country. I think church-state separation was founded in this country by people of faith. But today, religious extremists have gotten away with mislabeling it as being anti-religion and anti-Christian. And you know what, Doug? If you got a hold of religious extremist playbook and you turn to page 1, I think what you would see it right there is call anything progressive that interferes with us codifying our power, call that anti-Christian or anti-religion. And so I think that they have been quite successful in waging that campaign. And it makes, I think, sometimes Democrats feel worried. I think Democrats have also been labeled as being anti-religion. And so I think they get fearful, right, about looking anti-religion. And the irony is church-state separation protects religion just as much as it protects religious freedom for everyone. So that's really a shame. So part of what we're calling for in our national recommitment to separate church and state campaign is for faith leaders to join us. Because just like those plaintiffs in Missouri, it is vital that we have those faith voices leading, right, and joining with the non-religious to say, hey, in America, church and state are separate, and that's a good thing for all of us.
Yeah, you were mentioning about maybe the Democrats have being concerned about being targeted as well. I think too, though, that they use the pulpit themselves. I mean, it's not as to me, it doesn't seem as garish as how the Republicans do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think maybe they're thinking it might impede their work as well. Maybe.
I mean, in houses of worship, you're allowed to talk about political issues. You're just not allowed to endorse or oppose a candidate, right? And that gives you a lot of latitude. You can even invite candidates to your church or synagogue or mosque or whatever you call yours, so long as you're inviting folks from both sides, of the aisle. And if those folks don't show up, you can still have your event. So there are lots of ways that you can still legally kind of discuss the issues of the day without going partisan. But no, I mean, it's inappropriate for all of us, and it's short-sighted for anyone to think that they can get away with going partisan in a way that ultimately doesn't harm both religion and our democracy.
This is Glass City Humanist, a show about humanism by a humanist.
And I don't know if you were aware, or you probably were on the news today. I saw on Hemant Mehta, the Friendly Atheist, was talking about it today, that there's a sectarian school in Maine that is filing a lawsuit because they have to follow the Maine human rights code in order to get that tax money that the Supreme Court just said that they could get.
Yeah,
It's a non-discrimination policy or something like that, but it applies to anybody that gets tax dollars for their school.
That's right. Right. And again, I mean, with public funds, public strings are attached. If you accept public money, you got to play by the same rules as everyone else. Guess what your choice is? You cannot accept public money and do what you want. But once you do, you have to play by the same rules, period. And I think what's unknown in this country is the war that religious extremists are waging on public schools. I don't think people are aware that these same folks who are attacking abortion rights, undermining LGBTQ equality, they're the ones that would be very happy to see public schools shut down and private Christian academies all funded with tax dollars. That is a stated goal of these folks.
Thank you for listening. For more information about the topics in this episode, please visit glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the secular humanists of Western Lake Erie. Sholi can be reached at humanistswle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he's solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.